Welcome to my YouTube channel, Mark at A Matter of Truth. All of my Bible teaching songs are based upon my sound biblical Bible studies on my website at thechurchofthefirstborn.net.
Hello everyone and welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're here today because we are embarking on a truly fascinating textual investigation. We're diving deep into a highly debated ancient text, Ephesians 5:22. Now for centuries, these specific words have shaped societal norms, relationships, and massive theological frameworks. But when we look at the source material today and actually strip away centuries of formatting to look at the raw, original language, a completely fascinating new picture starts to emerge. We're going to dig into the mechanics of translation and uncover the real historical context surrounding this famous passage.
Okay, let's dive right into this detective's roadmap. First up, the translation mystery. Then, the missing verb. Followed by context is everything, the culture of Ephesus, and finally, mutual submission.
All right, part 1, the translation mystery, establishing the baseline.
To really get the mystery presented in our source material, we first have to establish our baseline. We need to zoom in on the traditional understanding of this text, the one that's been printed in millions of books and spoken in countless ceremonies all across the globe. The traditional English translation of Ephesians 5:22 reads, "Wives, submit yourselves unto your own husbands, as unto the Lord." For a lot of folks, this is a super familiar phrase, right? Usually it's read as this standalone instruction, kicking off a brand new subject all about household hierarchies. It's the foundational interpretation that our source text is actually asking us to reconsider by looking really closely at how ancient languages are translated.
Moving right along to part 2, the missing verb, a linguistic anomaly.
When you compare the traditional English translation, which has that very clear active verb submit, to a literal word-for-word translation of the original Greek text, things get incredibly interesting. The literal Greek reads much closer to, "The women to the husbands be you being underset as to the Lord." Do you catch what's conspicuously absent there? The author argues that the verb submit is actually nowhere to be found in the original literal Greek text of this specific verse.
Which leads us to a massive, glaring question. If the verb submit isn't in the original text, why in the world did translators put it there? I mean, how does a sentence even function without a verb? And where did the translators pull it from? Well, to answer that, we have to pivot our investigation away from translation anomalies and look at the textual context surrounding the verse.
Which brings us to part 3, context is everything. Time to zoom out.
Before we crack this, you have to remember a crucial historical fact. The original Greek text had no verse numbers, it had no punctuation marks, and it certainly had no section headings. Imagine trying to read just a massive, continuous wall of text with no spaces. Our source notes that translators artificially made verse 22 a new sentence. In fact, in many modern texts, they even added a bold heading right above it, like wives and husbands. The author argues that this editorial choice completely and artificially disconnects the verse from the thoughts Paul was communicating right before it. Now, what's really interesting about this is how the source actually solves our missing verb mystery. Because ancient Greek didn't use sentences the way we do today, verse 22 was actually just an adverbial clause, continuing the thought directly from verse 21. Verse 21 says, "Submitting yourselves one to another in the fear of God," and then it just flows right into verse 22, "Wives, yourselves unto your own husbands." The author claims the translators basically borrowed the verb submit from that mutual instruction in verse 21 just to make verse 22 make sense in English. But by severing it into a brand new sentence, they essentially stripped away the mutual context of verse 21, the actual instruction that everyone is supposed to submit to each other.
And if we pull back even further to look at Paul's broader instructions in Ephesians chapter 5, a really clear theme emerges. When the source breaks down the chapter's progression, a fascinating pattern shows up. Paul tells the church to walk in love, to walk as children of light, and to walk circumspectly. The big recurring motif throughout this entire section of the letter is the goal of not giving place to the devil. The author argues that absolutely everything in this chapter, including the instructions given to spouses, is completely tethered to this overarching goal of living wisely and safely.
Let's actually clarify one of those key terms. Walking circumspectly means to be careful and aware, specifically, not putting oneself in areas of temptation. The source connects this directly to the instruction for wives. The author argues that by instructing wives to learn from and direct their questions to their own husbands rather than other men, Paul was encouraging them to walk circumspectly. This was a practical way to avoid giving place to the devil through inappropriate situations, idle gossip, or spreading rumors that could literally fracture the early church.
All right, let's look at part 4, the culture of Ephesus.
We're looking at the macro-historical level now.
But you've got to wonder, why would Paul need to give this specific instruction to this specific church? Well, the source provides some incredibly vivid cultural facts about ancient Ephesus to help answer that. This was a highly pagan society, and they prominently worshipped female deities, most notably Artemis. In this specific cultural religious system, women actually acted as the primary religious leaders. And according to the source, they had a strong cultural habit of lording their authority over men. The societal dynamic here was vastly different from other parts of the ancient world.
Understanding that cultural backdrop totally changes how you might read the text, right? The author presents the theory that Paul wasn't making some universal decree about women being property. Instead, he was correcting a hyperlocal cultural problem. You have these Ephesian women who are used to dominating men in pagan worship, converting to Christianity, and carrying those old pagan lording behaviors right into the Christian church with them. So Paul was writing to correct this specific imbalance, urging a return to mutual respect.
Which brings us to our final section, Part 5, Mutual Submission, the final theological view.
So bringing all these linguistic anomalies and macro-historical clues together, we are basically left looking at two diverging paths of interpretation. On one side, the traditional view often results in treating the text as a command for blind obedience and one-sided submission from women. But on the other side, the source argument suggests the text is actually teaching mutual submission, where both partners submit to each other and to godly teaching together. So the crucial point here is that the author views this passage not as a tool for establishing dominance, but as a call for mutual humility rooted right there in the preceding verse. The source also takes a moment to clarify the concept of reverence, which pops up later in Ephesians 5:33. The author defines it super simply, to treat someone respectfully. It explicitly does not mean offering blind submission to ungodly commands. The source notes this is especially relevant for a Christian married to an unbeliever. They are called to walk in love and respect, for sure, but never to blindly obey commands that would cause them to walk in darkness.
Furthermore, the author highlights that this passage makes massive, heavy demands on men too. Husbands are commanded to love their wives as Christ loved the church, which literally means laying down their lives. They are called to be servants and to sacrifice. The source argues that this directly contradicts any interpretation that treats women as property or slaves. Ultimately, both partners are called to submit to God's word and to serve one another.
And that wraps up today's explainer, leaving us with a truly provocative question to chew on. How can a single added word and the cultural lens of translators shape the interpretation of an ancient text for centuries? It is a pretty powerful reminder of how much history, grammar, and context absolutely matter when we engage with historical documents. Translators are human, and the editorial choices they make can literally echo through generations. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive. I really hope this leaves you eager to look a little closer at the history behind the texts that shape our world.
Please read the in-depth Bible studies on my websites at AMatterOfTruth and the churchofthefirstborn.net. And if you like this Bible teaching song video, please share the link with others. Thanks for watching, and may God bless you richly for sharing the true gospel. Brother Mark.